Over the past 20 years, finesse fishing has become more prevalent among bass fishermen across the country. For the purpose of this program, we'll define finesse systems as small, subtle baits which are delivered with fine line and light equipment. The finesse style of fishing has its roots in the tournament angling scene, where contestants have to produce regardless of the conditions. Interestingly, many of these techniques originated regionally, though often work anywhere bass swim. Anglers in the know generally break out the finesse gear when bass fishing is tough. There are a number of conditions in which these tactics and strategies shine. In cold water, bass tend to be very lethargic. Small and slow is the only way to trigger strikes. Clear water and light tackle go hand in hand. Many of the tried and true finesse strategies were developed to catch wary bass from the gin-clear western and mid-south reservoirs. Deep water and sparse cover also create situations where finesse techniques are a good option. Heavy fishing pressure or cold fronts can also cause conditions where finesse may be the only way to catch inactive and skittish bass.
I have sure got sold on fishing these smaller baits.
On today's program, we'll highlight the ins and outs of consistently catching big smallmouth and largemouth bass in circumstances where fishing is, well, not as tough as most anglers think.
Absolutely. What's in here?
Misconceptions about chilly water bass fishing are plentiful indeed. Water's just too cold. The fish are asleep. In reality, nothing could be further from the truth. In many regions of the country, bass are active even in water temperatures that hover in the 30s. The key, obviously, is first finding them. Generally, in cold water conditions, bass will concentrate on sharp drop-offs, making them even more accessible to the astute angler. The other part of the puzzle is presentation. Presenting small baits retrieved ultra slowly is the best tactic when water dips below the 45-degree range. In these first two segments, we'll concentrate on some cold water strategies that might just surprise you warm water bass fishermen. Smallmouth bass will hit a wide variety of presentations, but under certain conditions, some offerings will blow the others out of the water. Let's join Al and James Lindner with a phenomenal tactic for cold water smallies.
Every once in a while, we come across a system of fishing that is absolutely mind-boggling. When you see it work, it's astounding. And that happens with a lot of different kinds of methods. And right now, we're fishing, obviously, for smallmouth bass. Very, very cold water. We're catching smallmouth bass on crappie jigs underneath a float. A system of fishing that was developed in Kentucky, Tennessee in the winter months, appropriately called the float and fly. Now you say that seems strange. Smallmouths under a float? Almost like crappie fishing? Well, I'll tell you something, when the conditions are right, there's no faster way of catching fish. And it'll be when nothing else is working. And I mean nothing else. Ooh, there's another one, Al. Ooh. Here we go. Ooh. It's so fun to see that bobber go down, I can tell you that much. Ooh. Oh, I got one too. Look at that. Look at that. A double. It's incredible how many fish you can get doing this.
Really highly effective in really cold water. It was actually developed in the Mid-South reservoirs. A gentleman that actually Al fished with, his name was Charlie Knuckles. And him and his partner just blew tournaments away down in Tennessee, in Kentucky with the system. Look at that guy there. Beautiful fish. And look where he's hooked. Right in the very tip of the snout with a tiny little jig like that. It's surprising how many times you hook fish just like that.
When you see this system work, as simple as it is, it's incredibly effective. It's a cold weather, cold weather, cold water system. Works its best in water temperatures of about high 30s into about the high 40s. When most other baits won't produce, this thing, you come through an area and go bing, 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 bing.
As we've stated already, the float and fly technique works best in cold water conditions. That is late fall, winter, and early spring. Locationally, throughout this period, smallmouth bass tend to gather on sharp-dropping chunk rock points with direct access to the main river channel. It's a real simple system that's incredibly effective for reservoir smallmouths.
You can see that real long, soft action rod, which works out well. We're running real light line, 4 to 6 pound test in a 6.5 to about an 8 foot medium to softer action rod. Come here, boy. You gotta let these boys lean on it. Come here. Come here. Oh, there you go. There we go. Look at that guy. Very small jigs, and you'll notice every one of them is hooked in the exact same spot, right in the tip of the nose. Beautiful fish.
You get used to lobbing the cast. It's pretty simple, that lob cast. You bring the rod back and it's almost like fly fishing in a way with a spinning rod. Bait hits, you leave it sink. Then you shake it a little bit. You just shake it so the float just moves that jig and it just barely dances. Then you move it, then you pull it, and it actually pendulums. The float and the fly is sitting like this, but when you pull it, it comes like this. And then you stop it and it swings back in place. And then you shake it 3 or 4 times, you pull it and you repeat the process. It's such a simple, simple method and so deadly.
What's really critical is the distance that you have this bait suspended under the bobber. When the water's real cold, in a lot of cases, the fish aren't going to come up vertically a long distance to hit the bait. And in some cases, 6 or 8 inches could make the difference between catching a lot of fish or no fish. He's got another one.
Yeah, just big enough. I went to 6 pound test line. I'm cheating a little bit. Not every jig will work. You actually need a very small light hair jig. This artificial hair that we're using here seems to work really good. It's small, it's compact, and that's key in this cold water. A small compact jig. And it's got to just sit there and be able to breathe. A little bit of marabou will work, fox hair, anything that is fine and sits in place and just barely moves. It's got action built into the jig tail itself. It won't work with plastic. Again, it won't work with plastic. It's got to be a hair jig.
The other thing is to make sure that the bait is hanging vertically in the water column like this, and you want to hold the eye back a little bit so that the bait hangs straight. In that little bit of movement with your either jigging or just actually letting it drift, we have enough wind where it's moving the bait pretty naturally with just a little bit of wind. You don't even have to give it that much action. Just loaded with bait in here, Al. Right now we're casting this float and fly system, but another good method is to actually control drift, and actually you just move along contours and actually just drag the bobber and back of the boat, maybe a cast and a half. It's a real efficient means to fish the bait.
Oh, got him. I don't believe in a short segment like this, you have no idea on how many smallmouths we're catching and how fast this bite is. We can't make the show all of them of all sizes. I mean, it is absolutely incredible how many fish. Look, he's got another one.
Particularly when you start talking cold water, a lot of people would say, a real good day, or even a fair day, you'd catch, 5 or 6 fish would be a pretty good day in real cold water. With this system, it's not uncommon to go catch lots of fish.
Look at, oh, nice one again.
There you go. Ooh.
Whoa, I'll tell you what, for 40-something degrees, I'm amazed at how good these fish are hitting. I am absolutely amazed. You like smallmouth bass fishing, you got to give this a try. It's a system that you will absolutely have to add to your bag of tricks. I mean, it works, and it works really, really well. The formula is so simple, it's incredible. Smallmouth bass, cold, clear water lakes, light line 4 to 6 pound test, crappie jigs, and a float. And you'll get confidence in fishing this the first time you try it. It's an amazing method of catching fish when nothing else will work. And it's fun.
Largemouth bass are one of the most widely distributed species of fish in America. Every state in the Union except Alaska sports a fishable population of largemouth bass. But as Al Lindner and biologist Steve Quinn agree, not all bass are created equal.
Look at that baby, huh? Hey, how many times have you heard somebody make the statement, a bass is a bass is a bass? Doesn't make no difference if it's in Minnesota, Kansas, Florida. A largemouth bass is a largemouth bass. Well, let me tell you, that isn't necessarily true. Let us explain.
.43-degree water, and he's turned it up. Amazing. Those Minnesota bass are just amazing creatures. In fact, I was just reading a study, and they transported bass from different areas and see how they did in different regions, and they brought some from Illinois and put them in ponds in Minnesota and checked on them, and they didn't survive the winter, not a single one. They just couldn't tolerate it, let alone fish from, say, Tennessee or Florida. They're a unique breed, specially adapted to these really rugged, harsh winter conditions.
Although largemouth bass from across the country may look identical, studies show that they vary tremendously in their tolerance of water temperature extremes. For example, bass in Canada, Minnesota, Michigan, and New York have to withstand 5 months of ice cover. And in Florida and Texas, lakes may exceed 95 degrees for days at a time. In the far north, bass have a compressed window of opportunity to feed, and they remain active in water temperatures far colder than their southern cousins. This is an overlooked opportunity for anglers to catch some of the biggest bass of the year, after most folks have called it quits. Wherever you live, you can extend your fishing season by understanding a bit more about the nature of the bass and how they react to cooling water temperatures.
More fun. You got to bundle up for the weather, but then you can enjoy some of the best bass fishing of the year. No question.
Oh, man. Boy, she's a good one. Got into another pot of them here, Steve. You hit that other one and bingo. Look how fat this fish is, man. Look at how fat this thing is. Wow.
That one's feeding up for winter.
She is in there chowing down. There is no question about. Wait till you see this thing. Is she ever a pig? Look at the belly on her. She looks like she ought to be spawning, huh? Holy moly. Look at that fish. That is almost a freak-looking fish. Look at that.
So round.
Wow. What a giant. What a giant. You know, we're catching these fish mainly on artificials right now. There's no question live bait works really good in a lot of conditions like this, but let us show you some of our favorite cold water, real cold water presentations. Bass in these water temperatures are not at all that willing to chase down a lure. So choosing a smaller lure with a slow drop speed is critical. I prefer a 1/8 to 1/4 ounce hair jig or a living rubber jig with a 3-inch power craw or a small pork frog on it. I also like a 1/16 to 1/4 ounce mushroom head jig, and I either tip it with a tube or a paddle tail. It's important to remember that the bite at this time is very, very subtle. It's almost like a drag. If you feel something out of the ordinary, hey, set the hook.
Oh, nice fish. Little old jig and big bass in cold water. The problem in this cold water, you don't want to retie too much, but you need to.
Oh, boy, did that one hit it, Steve. Oh, look at that. Look, she's coming up. She's even going to break in this cold water.
Oh, there's a big one.
Oh. They're all big. They're all big. Look at that. Man, oh, man. I'll tell you, last few years, in these cold water conditions, I have sure got sold on fishing these smaller baits. You know, the key, the actual key when it's all said and done to putting these big bass in a boat in cold water conditions is the three things we were talking about this morning coming up here. Fishing lighter baits, smaller baits, and fishing a lot slower. Deadly for cold water bass. Great day.
If possible, you definitely want to pick your days during the cold water period. Mild days with low wind can really stimulate bass activity in cold water. Water clarity, specifically clear water, is the primary focus of the next two segments. Bass that live in clear water are generally harder to catch than bass that live in dark water for a number of reasons. Clear water fish can more easily see flaws in your presentation. They also can live deeper and often suspend, feeding on open water forage. Clear water bass tend to be more mobile fish. Coming up, we'll look at a variety of highly effective strategies to deal with extreme clear water conditions.
And I'm absolutely...
How do you catch big fish? Timing can be a large part of the puzzle. In many waters, the absolutely largest fish are caught during relatively narrow seasonal time frames. Taking advantage of these windows of opportunity is a big part of the fishing game, especially when you're targeting the big boys. Let's join Al Lindner and guest Eric Anderson as they size up the best bite for big bass in canyon reservoirs.
She's gonna break, look at her. Oh boy, what a beauty that is, man. Woo! What a beauty that is. Man, oh man. Whoa. With that light line, you can't do too much. When I set the hook on that sucker, I knew I had a big dude. Oh, she's gonna come up and give us one more look at her. Whoa, she's back down again. Oh, look at her bulldog. When you got a back reel on a largemouth, although we're only using 6 and 8 pound test line in this real clear water. This is the epitome of finesse fishing, and yet a lot of people don't think you can catch these real big dogs like this doing this. And that's a mistake. Well, you see the size of this sucker. If she ever decides to quiet down a moment. For my first fish of the day, Eric, I'm highly impressed. Oh, look at that dude. Come here, big mama. Oh, look at him. Oh, woo. Boy, that's a horse and a half. That is absolutely a horse and a half. I don't know if it gets any better as the day goes on, but I do know that this is a big fish for a start fish. You know, we're fishing in the Southwest, and in this part of the country, along with the West Coast, many of the finesse approaches that we use in today's modern bass fishing techniques have been developed in this part of the country on lakes like we're on right now. Deep, cold, clear bodies of water that have tremendous boat traffic, yet hold some giant fish. Like this baby. You know, of all of the finesse techniques that have come out of the Southwest Western region, I think the biggest contribution to the world of sport fishing today is this thing we call a tube. What an incredible bass producer, particularly early in the season. Largemouth, smallmouth, everything. The silly looking thing that looks like a stick in the water, we owe a lot to the Southwest Western anglers for developing this bait. It is a killer. You know, we're fishing on Saguaro Lake in Arizona. It's really a stone's throw away from downtown Phoenix. Millions and millions of people around here, and the lake is just loaded with boat traffic. Constantly. There's all kinds of boat traffic, jet skis, water skiers, fishermen. There's a lot of pressure on the lake. Yet it produces some tremendously big fish. Like a lot of canyon reservoirs, they can be pretty touchy. There's certain times of the year that they're better to fish than others, right?
You know, Al, that's right. My best bass was an 11-2 that came in Saguaro at night. During most of the year, that's going to be the bite on canyon reservoirs. Right now, we're fishing a peak time of the year when these fish are up shallow, they're aggressive, they're looking to spawn. It's a 6-week window from first part of March till the first part of April when you get a good daytime bite. And there's a tremendous number of fish in Saguaro that are between like 6.5 and 8 pounds. And those are beauties any way you look at it, anytime.
As Eric stated earlier, this period in spring is simply the most consistent daytime bite for big bass in canyon reservoirs. A lot of anglers in spring focus their efforts in and around shallow coves. Little do they realize some of the bigger fish will be found on small, shallow flats out in the main body of the lake itself. Canyon reservoir bass are a unique breed. They have to be in most of these lakes to survive. There's not a lot of shallow shelves or cover for fish to live around. Throughout the summer warm water months, most of these bass suspend and they feed on threadfin shad or trout, which are stocked in these lakes. There's a lot of night fishing that happens in bodies of water like this throughout the year. Oh, Eric, feel it's a big fish again. I got to pull off of that bank. Here she comes, here she comes. Oh man, it's interesting. Here, she's coming up again. Look at her, look at this, look at this, look at this, look at this. Oh boy, these are nice fish. This one here, I'll show you what this one bit on. Oh, nice one, nice one. Come here, big dog. Boy, that clear water, Eric, you could see that fish way down there, man. Just one for the road, huh? A big baby? Boy, are these beautiful looking bass. Look how healthy these fish are. Whew! Man, they're nice looking fish. This fish bit on a mushroom head in a tube. You know, we've got a variety of different rods rigged with a variety of different tube concoctions that we use in different situations depending on the cover and the type of rocks you're fishing and what the situation calls for. Let me show you some of the more productive tube rigging techniques. Boy, these fish here are tremendous. I've been hooked on tube baits since they were first introduced in the mid-70s. They're my go-to baits when the fishing's tough or when I'm fishing clear water where bass can be very, very spooky. There's a lot of different ways to fish tubes. The standard mushroom head jig is a great option for subtle bottom bouncing retrieves. An interior weighted tube is a good way to fish with a slow swimming retrieve. If I'm fishing around heavy cover like brush or weeds, I'll use a Texas rig tube. You know, we've been playing with colors all day today. A couple colors seem to have worked better than others. It didn't seem to be a noticeable difference. But what we're doing in a lot of these areas that seems to be the most productive is actually just taking that tube and throwing it out almost on a jig head and dragging it with the boat. We're sweeping over some of these deeper structures and just ever so slowly lollygagging along. I mean, you're talking fishing very, very slow. And that is one of the keys to success with a tube. Fishing very slow with a very, very light jig head. And generally speaking, in clearer water, in fairly shallow water, clear water, say 20 foot or less, rule of thumb is you want to fish the lightest head you can get away with, and tending to fish fairly light line. Light head naturally means light line, so we're using more spinning rods than anything with 8-pound test line. And that seems to be the best producer with a tube, as far as I'm concerned, most of the time.
On these canyon reservoirs like this, the banks you need to find are the smaller rock is key with a few large scattered boulders. And a flat is relative. A flat here may be 15 or 20 feet deep versus 100 in the channel, but that flat's going to hold these big pre-spawn cruisers, and that's the ones we're looking for.
She's coming up, Eric. Here she comes, man. Right Oh, man.
Oh!
Oh. Look at that. Look at that. Oh, look at the belly on this one, man. Just like that one earlier. Incredible, the average size fish. Absolutely incredible. Look at that. Saguaro Lake. I don't know if you're gonna get me going back home to Minnesota when I can catch bass like this here. Oh man, those are beautiful fish. Some real honkers in here. You know, you look at a tube in the water and you wonder, why in the world would a fish like this hit something like this? It looks like a stick coming through the water. It really doesn't look like anything, but that's the key to success with a tube. That's finesse fishing for bass at its best.
In the world of bass fishing, there are countless lures and presentation techniques. We have crankbaits, spinnerbaits, soft plastic, top water, jerkbaits, etc., etc. Each bait has a time and a place when they're the best option based on the mood and location of the fish. Let's join Al and James Lindner in the heart of Minnesota smallmouth country with a unique strategy for presenting soft plastic grubs.
You know, Jim and I got onto this presentation earlier this year. We were fishing a really big smallmouth tournament called the Sturgeon Bay Open, probably the biggest smallmouth tournament in North America. There was 232 teams that fished in this one. I got this fish. I've got to interrupt you a moment here. Here she comes. Look at that.
Another fork?
Yeah. Yeah, I think he might have had a buddy on him. I'll get back to what I was saying in a minute. Let me land this fish. Come here, baby. And as we were fishing there, we heard some of the local guys comment about one of the techniques that they did a lot there was swim to grub instead of jig to grub. And we started doing it in practice. And lo and behold, man, it was really the key presentation for the smallies. Well, after we left Door County and came back to a lot of the water that we fish smallmouth in, we applied it in rivers and lakes like we're on now, where the smallies use a lot of open water minnows, where they chase down minnows, and it's worked everywhere. It is so simple, yet so deadly.
Ooh, there's one. Look at that guy. Ooh. Not a big guy.
He spit a minnow out.
Yeah, he sure did. Look at that. He sure did. That goes to show you. There we go. One of the real important things is the matching the head weight to the grub you're throwing, the size of the grub you're throwing. Realistically, these fish that are keying in on minnows are feeding on big bait. And a lot of times these big grubs with a relatively light weight, right now this is a 4-inch power grub, and I have an 1/8 ounce jig head, mushroom head jig, and that's the right jig weight for the particular situation that we're fishing here. Most of the areas we're fishing here is probably about 15 foot and shallower, and we're literally just sweeping the bait over these rock humps, through the ditches, any available cover that's in this structure. So it's a really highly efficient means to cover water quickly.
You know, presentation is really simple. Don't get tricky. You cast it out, engage the reel, put the rod tip down toward the water, and just turn the reel handle at a steady pace. Don't do any of this. Don't start jigging, flipping, flopping. The more things you do, the less fish you're going to catch. Just remember, keep it simple. Once you get the size of the bait to the weight of the jig head, and once that's right, all you do is cast it out and reel it in. Hey, it's as simple as it can be. And man, is it deadly. It's nice to have simple things in fishing that work really well. This is one of them.
This particular lake that we're on here, these fish are really keyed on feeding on smelt, which is an open water bait fish. In a lot of cases that these fish are really tuned in to feeding and really targeting their food looking up in the water column, you know what I mean? They're sitting there positioned on these rock shelves, or when they roam around, they're actually looking up to find minnows swimming through the water column versus looking at the bottom for crayfish or other types of invertebrates.
Oh. I love this. I absolutely love it.
It's another big boy. There is a bunch of them in here.
Come on. Yeah, yeah. Oh, my bait just come off. I seen that minnow she spit. It's about the same size as the grub we're throwing. You know, that's another factor besides the weight of the jig and the color patterns. You always pay attention to size. We're using right now, we're chunking, you know, 4-inch grub. Sometimes you might want to go as small as a 2-incher. Yeah, throw me another one. That's perfect, Jimmy. This is about the size of the bait that they're gobbling, so it's working and working well.
Thing is, with a big grub like this, you got to sort of skewer it on there right, so the bait tracks straight through the water. If it's kinked up, it sort of looks funky and it doesn't look natural, but if you skewer it on there straight, it cruises through the water with that tail flapping in a real natural look. We've caught fish in water temperature as cool as 45 degrees. The thing is what we did when that water was really cold is we actually went to a very light head with the same size grub. In that way, what you could do with like a 16th ounce head and a 4-inch bait, you could actually move it at a really slow speed. So there's some different things that you can do by manipulating the size of the grub, the weight of the jig, to adjust your presentation to trigger the fish.
You know, my confidence in swimming this thing out over deep water is just incredible. I mean, I've got no problem taking this bait and swimming it 2 feet down over 15, 20 feet of water out off a point on these minnow-eating lakes. And I'm catching fish doing this. The bait is 2, 3 feet down, moving way out off at a point. You'll see the drop-off, you'll see the ledge. Most guys will just concentrate in that dark area and then they let the jig fall. Don't do it in these conditions. Swim it right on out, just keep it coming and you'll get fish. You'll see them hit 10 feet from the boat.
There we go. Ooh, ow, another horse. So one thing, a lot of these lakes, particularly where you got really big smallmouths and they feed on this pelagic forage, there's no question about it. Something as simple as swimming grubs can make a dramatic difference in the number of fish you catch. Look at this, another cookie cutter monster brown bass. Look at that. Beautiful fish. Look at that.
Electronics play an instrumental role in any deep water fishing situation. Finesse fishing deep water dictates exact boat control to deliver subtle baits along specific weed edges, isolated rock piles, and points that can hold mega schools of bass. In this next section, we'll look at jig worming the deep weed edge, and we'll provide an update on Carolina rigging. In lakes, rivers, and reservoirs across the country, weeds are a primary habitat for bass. Within these waters, you generally find 3 distinctly different weed zones. There is the slop, or thick, shallow cover. You have the expansive flats and the deep weed edge. A good portion of the year, the deep weed edge is a pivot point that concentrates bass and other species. Let's join Dan Sura and Jim Lindner with a unique finesse tactic for deep weed bass.
Out of the weeds here,
I
James.
got him. Oh. There we go. That's a better size one there. Come here. Come here, buddy. Come on. You know, there's a lot of different techniques that you can use to catch bass. Right now, Dan Sura and I are going to look at a real unique jig worm technique, which is commonly used by guides in the upper Midwest. And it's phenomenally effective for catching bass on deep weed lines. There's a beauty, nice starter fish. Get her back in the water. Come on. Come on. There we go.
Jig worming, well, I've caught fish from mid-spring all the way through mid-fall. Prime time jig worming is midsummer. You're cruising along the developing weed edges and you're fishing for bass. And one other thing about this system, I've caught northerns, walleyes, big panfish, all just the same basic system. You can downsize this same system and go to an 1/8 or 1/16 ounce jig head with a little tiny grub, and you can catch some big bull bluegills doing the same thing. It's a very effective system for lots of different kinds of fish.
This is a really sort of a finesse technique, and it's extremely efficient. You can cover a lot of water pretty quickly. You're just moving along, holding the boat on the deepest weed edge, and whatever that might be. The deep weed edge is all sort of relative. In the lake we happen to be fishing, the deep weed edge is about 12, 13 feet. In some lakes, if it's real dark water, that could be 7 feet. In a really extremely clear lake where the weeds would grow deep, that could be as deep as 15 or 18 foot deep. But the weed edge is where this bait really works well. You can see the deepest weed, and we're just starting to back off the weed wall. And we're just casting in about 10 feet and working it about 10 feet out. On this particular spot,
James.
Dan's got another one, nice
Whoa,
one.
whoa, 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 whoa.
There you go.
You gotta play them. One thing about fishing with a jig, as James was discussing, you're fishing an exposed hook. And really, with a little bit of practice, you can work this thing through some, you know, fairly significant weed cover. It's not like you're pitching it into the middle of the weed bed like you would a Texas rig. You're fishing the edges, but by simply fishing this exposed hook, a fish comes up and bites the bait, you're going to get hooked. So it's a great system. If you're a beginning angler, you're going to catch a lot of fish. They'll just pick it up and swim with it a lot of times.
The reason for the light wire hook is you can actually pitch it up into the weeds. As you let it sink and it gets hung up like this, I'll let it drop until it hits the weeds. And then when you get hung, you give it a quick pop and let it fall. Let it fall until it hits the edge of the weeds again. Do the same thing, and that's when a lot of the fish will hit this bait.
The system is very, very simple. A jig head, but you'll notice the little flanges on the jig head. That's to keep the soft plastic attached as you're popping it through the weeds. You simply reach into the old Tacologic sack and grab a power worm. I'm going to bite it down just a little bit. You simply thread it on, like so, and up and over the barbs.
Oh. Oh. Oh.
Get him up!
Oh, oh, ooh. Mr. Sir, I don't know what this guy here is. This has got to either be a big northern or it's a real big bass.
I'm out of the weeds though, just
Whoa.
in case.
That's a better
bass.
size. No, it's got to be a big northern. If it's a bass,
It's a bass. Oh, on the drop, James.
Weird.
On the drop.
Coming up. Ooh. All
Yes.
I got is a northerini.
You stay on the northern. You clear the pike out of here, and I'll take care of the bass.
You know, we get to travel all over the country shooting In-Fisherman television shows and material for In-Fisherman magazine. We get to see a lot of different techniques that are used regionally that haven't really gained national acceptance as far as soft plastics go. And it's interesting in the fact that we bring them back and we try them here. We use them all over the country, and a lot of soft plastic techniques really work cross-geographically. They work all over the country as long as the conditions are right. And that's the thing with any type of fishing, I think, is the willingness to adapt for the situation.
One of the real important things when fishing a jig worm is feeling the lure and knowing that this fish hit on the drop. The lure hit the water and it was sinking. The fish inhaled it and swam off with it. You've always got to be ready for that bite. A lot of times the bass will hit on the drop. Other times it'll wait until the lure makes contact with the weeds. When you pop it free, boom, the bass is on it. Just like a chicken on a June bug.
One thing you want to be aware of is the type of weeds the fish are holding in. Like we happen to be catching a lot of fish out of cabbage or coontail, in some cases milfoil. In the North Country, the bass just had the tendency to relate to those types of weeds. There's a lot of other weeds in these lakes that the fish, or bass specifically, just don't hold on. So when you catch a fish, a lot of times you'll see he'll be tearing up weeds. Be aware of that type of weed and look for other spots within the lake like that, because the other schools of fish may be using that same type of weed habitat.
And what you're looking for as you're moving along these weed edges are pockets, points, maybe an isolated clump of weeds off of the main edge. Those are prime fish holding areas. And one of the things that we like to do is to count the bait down. What I'll do is I'll cast along parallel to the weed edge, and I'll count it down 1001 until I contact the weed. Then I'll pop it free. Now maybe my next cast I'll make it a little bit further out, and if I don't hit any weeds, I know what? I know there's a corner there. Therefore, we know to place the next cast and always maintain contact with that weed edge.
Ooh, he's a little bit better one, Dan. Oh. See, there we go. Whoa. Whoa. Light line. That's really part of this system with these light jig heads, is to use a light to medium action spinning rod spooled with we got 10-pound test XT on it. So occasionally you catch some pretty big bass doing this. That guy there really inhaled it nicely. Gotta back off there. Nice fish. Little beauty. Drop speed is one of the most important aspects of jigworm fishing. We carry a selection of mushroom head jigs ranging from 1/4 ounce to as light as a 1/16 of an ounce. Heavier jigs are generally used when bass are holding deep at the base of weed edges, while light heads work best when the bass are suspended high in the weeds. It's vitally important to experiment with drop speed. You can alter the fall rate of the bait in two ways, by either changing the jig weight or changing the size of the soft plastic trailer. You're coming up to a really good spot here, Dan. As soon as we hit this wall right here, Daniel, you're gonna get one right in here. A big part of the system is actually boat control. And as you can see, I started to pull up in the weeds, and what I'll do is simply just kick the engine just to move off the edge of the weeds, and I'm just sort of slowly moving along, casting, just sort of walking your way along, making real short casts. You can see a lot of bait, and you can see it up on the surface right here. There's a lot of minnows and stuff in here, which is sort of a good sign.
There he is, James.
Big bass. There's some big bass sitting on the tips of these points sometimes. Nice bass.
Oh, yes, it is. Look at this. Yes. Oh. There we go. Come on, fish. No, not the biggest fish in the lake, but we'll take them. All of the different types of soft plastics available to catch bass, you can fish almost every one of them on the simple little jig head like this. What could you fish? Well, I'm using a Berkeley power bait. You can also use craws, grubs of all different types, and tubes, and especially the new paddle tail lures, which are becoming popular now, especially fishing where a lot of plastics are being used. So you can use lots of different plastics on the simple jig head system.
Another little point. I've never fished this point right here.
Stable weather, got ideal conditions for boat control, and the fish are absolutely on the chew a little bit here.
Oh, cast right back in there, Dan. Surprising that these guys are not jumping for some reason. This guy here is just digging. Come on, buddy.
Must have hit on the fall, huh?
Come here. Come on.
Watch it, he's gonna jump.
Now you're talking. You know, jigworm fishing is really sort of a numbers game. Though on occasion, you'll put some really nice fish in the boat. You know, one of the real keys to fishing success is the willingness to adapt to given situations and experimenting, and the willingness to try different things. It'll definitely put more fish in the boat for you.
Soft plastics are extraordinarily versatile bass baits. You can fish them on Texas rigs, jigs, with a wacky worm style, or mojo rigging. Each variation has its strong points depending on where the fish are and their mood. Let's join James and Al Lindner with an update on Carolina rigging, a great system for deep water bassing.
Oh, a big one, big one. Oh, boy, she's big, big fish, Jim. Look at that. Oh, boy. Big air.
Yeah, the
You
water's
betcha.
just starting to warm
Big
up.
air.
Boy, they're getting
Oh.
hot.
Oh, I love it.
Another giant. Look at the size of that guy.
Hey.
Oh.
Come on, Mama. Oh, come on, Mr. Bass, come here. You know, Carolina rig fishing has been around for really a long, long time. Yet every season, Manufacturers keep coming up with methods of fine-tuning this mainstay. You know, we see different sinker systems to help us fish through rocks and wood. We see some new adaptations in fishing line, which has been a big deal. Changes in hook designs and untold different plastic concoctions, and put all of these together, and they help us take a system of fishing that has always been good and continue to make it just a little bit better every single year.
For those not familiar with Carolina rigging, it is simply a subtle way to present soft plastics for bass. Today we're fishing a no-snag sliding sinker, a barrel swivel, 2.5 feet of vanish fluorocarbon line, which is almost invisible underwater, tied to a mustad hook, which is rigged with a subtle soft plastic bait.
Got him. Ooh. There's another one out. Oh. Whoa.
Right size.
That is a big boy. Oh, look at the size of that mule.
Carolina rigs really have application throughout the entire year. You'll have some number of fish will eat this presentation, but there's some little subtleties to Carolina rigging that are very important. One is the hook that you use, and I'll show you as soon as I get this guy here off. Ow, look at that beautiful bass. They're really jumping. Look at that, he came off, I'll let her go. Get that little buddy back in the water, come on. There we go. Look at this hook I got here. This is a really important when you're Carolina rigging, is a Z-bend hook. And the reason being is the Z-bend, see this little kink in there, will hold the bait in position. Right now we're throwing a new bait from Berkeley. It's called a Carolina rig slug, which is really a big fish bait, but there's a variety of different lures that you can use Carolina rig fishing, but you can see with that Z-bend how that bait is held in position, and that little kink there holds the bait, so as you drag through cover, tear over the bottom, it retains its stiffness on the hook. We'll get back out there. There's some real big boys on this spot here.
From our experience, the best way to fish a Carolina rig is with a bait casting rod. I got a quantum rod and reel system here. It's a 7-foot, and it's a fairly soft rod on the end of it. I like a 7-foot rod for this kind of fishing. It helps you present the bait right. Bait casting seems to work the best for this system of fishing. I like 14, 17, 20, even 30-pound test line if you're in heavy cover. But the longer rod helps you lob cast. And now you can't take, because of the weight to the length of the snell to the lure, you don't take it and flip it over your back like this and throw it this way. You're gonna have some problems. You have to lob cast it. And I mean, you bring the rod behind you and you throw it this way. If you're in front of the boat, you can lob cast it this way. But you don't come over the back of your head and throw the way you normally would with a Texas rig worm or a jig and craw or a jig and pig, something like that. But bait casting rods really seem to be the most efficient for this style of fishing.
You can see that rod tip just rolling over those rocks. A lot of times that's what you'll be dragging around clean, and then you'll hit some of them boulders, and then you really slow the bait down, and a lot of times that's where them fish are sitting.
Oh, this is fun. It's fun. And it's really effective in a lot of these deep water spots in the summer months on so many bodies of water. Deep water structures with rocks way out in the lake that people a lot of times don't get to. These big bass will bunch up on these spots. And this system of fishing in particular seems to shine in a situation like this. You know, everybody else is beating the bank, hanging in the cover. And these deep humps like this at this time of the year, boy, they get hot.
You can always tell when you get out on these deep water humps when you get a lot of fish on them, because you'll see a lot of bait fish out here. And you can see that's what this is here. There's great big clouds of bluegills or shiners or something else is out here. And then you'll see these big isolated fish like that. That's usually your bigger bass.
Oh, Jimmy, another one. Another big fish. I gotta come up to the front, man. She's coming on you. Look at this one. Oh. Holy moly, man. Oh, I lost her.
Whoa. See, that was a...
That fish was a huge, huge fish for where we're fishing. Huge fish. Oh, I was a six plus.
That's what I was gonna say.
Big fish for the North Country. You know, it's interesting. We're fishing deep humps predominantly, and filled with rocks, big snaggy boulders. I'm fishing a new concoction. It's called a no-snag sinker. This thing, the silly looking banana shaped thing, I could not drag a standard Carolina rig sinker in the kind of boulders we're fishing. This thing fishes through wood, stumps, weeds, big boulders. You got him?
Oh, I missed him.
This is a big part of this type of fishing. It's really been a plus for these snaggy areas.
Well, first couple of fish I caught on a Carolina slug. Right now I'm pulling just a plain power craw. But you'll look at this variety of different baits I got. Here's just a couple of different options that you can throw Carolina rigging. This is a 4-inch power noodle. These are really good when the fish are extremely inactive. It absolutely has no action at all. It's just a 4-inch little plastic stick. This is a new bait by Berkeley. This is called a Carolina rig slug, power slug, and that's a really hot bait for big bass. It's got a really nice subtle flapping action with this tail. Lizards is an old-time standby for Carolina rigging. There's a variety of different baits that work for Carolina rigging, and it's worthwhile to experiment with different profiles. It'll be really surprising. You'll fish around the hump and we'll be dragging one bait, catch 4 or 5 fish, then we'll change, you'll catch a couple more, change again, you'll catch a couple more. It just seems like a different profile bait will trigger different individual fish.
Oh, Jim, another big one, man. Oh, man. Here she comes. This has got to be a 5-pluser. Oh, yes, absolutely. Oh.
Ooh, there's one out. He's coming up. Look at this. He's going to jump. Oh, look at that monster. Oh.
Whoa, man, are they tough when that water gets warm. I see the sinker in there. Oh, boy, oh, boy, oh, boy. Oh, man, did you lose yours, Jim?
Yep.
Get out on some of these deep water humps, Carolina rigging, and you, without a doubt, catch some of the biggest fish that are available in that particular body of water. Deadly way of catching big, giant bass, no matter where you fish, north, south, east, or west, lakes, rivers, or reservoirs. Works everywhere.
As we've seen, there are a wide variety of factors that can make bass fishing tough. Fishing pressure can also sour the bite. Dramatic changes in weather and even moon phases can affect activity levels and the time when fish feed. In these last 2 segments, we'll look at 2 radical presentation strategies that can work when all else fails. An old angling adage is, if you want to catch big fish,
There she is. I got her.
use a big bait.
Look at him, James. Oh, he's big. Yes, look at the girth on that thing.
A truism if the fish are actively biting. In some cases, the exact opposite might be a better approach. Elephants occasionally like peanuts.
There we go. Oh, a big boy. He's got a nice attitude to him. Right now, Al and I are going to look at strategies to catch smallmouth bass when fishing gets tough. We'll get her back in the water.
Boy, there's actually a little bit of current. That wind created a little bit of current on these walls. Oh, man.
Another one?
Yeah.
That looks like a big boy there.
Yeah, she is. You know, we're fishing very, very tiny jigs. And you don't even feel the strike. All you actually feel is something different on the end of the line. Most of these fish hit that bait while it's free falling down those ledges. I mean, you just, all of a sudden you feel loss of feeling to the bait. There is no strike, and that's typical with real, real small, light baits like this. That's real typical. But the beauty is, they don't spit it. They will not spit the bait. Look at it. Hook right on the tip of his mouth, and hook well, I may add. Just kind of scarfed it when that thing is free falling, that bait is free falling, and they just kind of inhale. Now look at this, I want to show you this. What we're throwing is very light heads, and these are crappie baits. They're not bass baits. We're actually fishing baits that are designed for crappie that are from 1 to 2 inches in length. Very tiny, tiny baits. And when these fish shut off and get on the most vertical part of the structure you're fishing, sometimes they suspend down those walls. It's the ticket. I'm telling you, it's the ticket.
One thing what these small baits do is force you to fish very, very slow, and that matches the attitude of inactive fish. When fish get inactive, they're not actively foraging or looking for food, so they're not willing to run down a bait like a smallmouth are. When they're active, we're using husky jerks that are, you know, that long and snapping along, fishing it very, very erratically. They're on the opposite end of the spectrum. And when you fish slow, get it close to them, that's the key to catch these fish in this condition. But that may change. That's the interesting thing about smallmouth bass, that they can change over the course of like a day or two, can go from one end of the spectrum to the other end in a short period of time. You got one?
Yeah, nice
There
one.
you go. Big boy.
Nice one, yeah. Yeah, right where she should have been, James. Hold still. I can't get my lip lock on you. Yeah. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Hold still and I'll have you off here in a minute, young man. Whew. You know, something to keep in mind, whatever structure you're fishing for your smallies, when these fish turn on or get active, they get up on top of that bar, and horizontal baits really can trigger a lot of fish. Top water baits, spinner baits, crank baits, jerk baits. Fish are active and are moving across the top, and they'll hit a lot of horizontal baits fished real fast. But say a cold front comes in, or heavy fishing pressure, something that turns these babies off, where's the next place they go to? You come back there the next time and you could throw spinner baits across where you caught 30 fish the day before and say, hey, there's nothing here, they're long gone. In many cases, they didn't move 50 feet from where you were. Looking at this large underwater reef, smallmouth tend to move up and spread on top of the shallow flats when actively feeding. Conversely, inactive smallmouths tend to drain off the shallows and congregate on the fast-dropping points or inside corners that surround the flat. Hey, the best spots often have large boulders with the most distinct drop-off in the area.
Ooh, there's one. Ooh, that's a big boy right there. There's a number of different types of retrieves you can use using these small baits. We're casting in real slow retrieves, almost a swimming retrieve. But you can also just drag the bait, works a lot at times, particularly when the wind starts to get a little bit stronger. You can't control the bait quite as well. Jigging it, casting it, slow dragging can be really effective for these. Almost the same technique that you would use using a live bait rig. There we go. Not a bad one. This guy here, Al, has a tag in him.
We'll write that tag number down and then just report it to the DNR.
We're gonna get her back in the water.
Ooh, boy, did she come up, man.
That's a big boy there.
Yeah, it looked like it. Well, no, she ain't as big as I thought she was, but I'll take her. That one's prettier than some of them other ones that we were getting earlier. This one just is an ideal looking fish. Come here, Mr. Brown Bass. You know, both Jim and I love fishing tournaments, and we love fishing smallmouth. Every year, a couple of our favorite events that we fish as a team is on two of North America's better smallmouth lakes, Rainy Lake and Lake of the Woods, which are both on the Minnesota-Ontario border. And we've done extremely well over the years doing just what we're talking about. Getting on these structures, finding the most vertical drop-off on the structure piece you're fishing, and when the going gets tough, like cold fronts or heavy pressure, we pull on those vertical walls, we downsize, and we packed our wallet with a lot of money by doing it. There. Oh. Look at that. Nice fish. really a good fish. You know, every once in a while, as we travel across the country, not every once in a while, it happens a lot, for a wide variety of different kinds of fish, whether they're bass or bluegills or crappies or whatever, we see some local tricks of the trade, so to speak, that produce lots and lots of fish. Today we're going to be talking about wacky worming. That's right, wacky worming. A deadly system of taking bass out of clear, cold, early spring conditions when sometimes they won't hit nothing else.
You know, Al, it's a spooky fish system. That's what it is. We're in real clear water, I can see fish, and we're throwing heavy baits on them, they're swimming off. That's what the wacky is, a producer for tough, tough fish.
Let me show you how you rig these strings. It's really simple. First thing to keep in mind is a very light wire hook. It's got to be a soft, light wire mustad hook. Then you take this part of the worm, what would be termed the collar. All you do is put it in like that. Looks simple, doesn't it? It is simple. You take a nail, adjust the weights of the nail, you stick it right up in the front of the nose of the worm, and you dress it in like, whoops, I missed it a little bit. That becomes your weighting system. That is it. A light wire hook, a nail in the front of a straight tail worm, and that nail, when you pull it, the worm will fold over like this, but the weight will tip it back up and drive it a certain direction. You pull it, it folds back over like a, kind of like a U, and then it'll swing back the other way. It gets a real erratic action. And basically you fish these things on spinning rods to work them the best way with about 8 or 10 pound test line. You got a bite?
Whoa! Al, big, big, big dog. Big, big.
That's a big fish, Ryan. That's a big bass. That is a big fish.
Whoa! The wacky worm. Fish, big and small. Beautiful fish, Al.
The presentation is so simple on it. You do a lot of twicking like this. And that worm just, it flares, it flares, it flares. And it's early in the year in clear water like this, and this is where this thing really shines. Early in the season, clear water, tough bite, 2 baits, wacky worm and a tube, and you're gonna put plenty of fish in a boat. Fish have seen a lot of the tubes in many lakes, but not too many guys are fishing these wacky worms in these clear water conditions.
Harry, hit me and dropped it. Just hit and dropped.
I got it. Oh, yeah. Man, she's a tough one.
Is that the one we saw before cruising here?
I don't know. I've seen a couple of them. Not that one I seen earlier.
Was bigger.
Was much bigger.
I thought so,
You know,
too.
much, much bigger. Let me show you something here that's really interesting, the way we're fishing this stuff. For sensitivity and feel, it makes a huge difference. I've got fire line on a rod. We're throwing 10 pound test fire line, and you can see it's snelled right to about 18 inches of mono. And for conditions like this where sensitivity is so important, with your knot systems, with the mono striker, makes a huge difference. They just pick that bait up while it's free falling. They just touch it, and you feel them. That fire line in some situations is so incredibly deadly, and this is one of them.
When working fire line, you've really got to have a loose drag. You cannot pull them because A, you're either going to pull the hooks out of the fish's mouth or you're going to bend the hook out. We're using light wire hooks, so you've got to have a light drag.
In addition to that, you need a fairly light action rod. I'm throwing a medium action Quantum IM7, and it's got a lot of flex. Real fast tip, fair backbone. If you had a real stout rod, you just tear the hooks or fold the tip of the hooks over. A light action rod really makes a difference with this stuff.
Look at that one sitting under. I ain't even got to bother to.
Seen her flare. I seen something flare at it too. That was the fish I'm thinking of. It's about a 5er, and he just grabbed it, and I got him. And he's a good one. You can have some great catches of fish in clear water. All you do is adapt some of the more popular finesse systems of fishing, like we're talking about here. like wacky worming. Look at that belly on that one.
In the big picture, finesse fishing is unquestionably a highly effective means to catch bass in a wide variety of situations. Individually, each technique we've looked at, like jig worming, Carolina rigging, or swimming grubs, work best based on specific factors such as water clarity, water temperature, depth, cover, fishing pressure, and the bass's present feeding mood. As we've seen, small baits surely don't equate to small fish. Realistically, the feeding moods of bass changes a lot. A good portion of the time, they're in a neutral or negative feeding attitude where finesse can be the ticket to success.